Hey guys, welcome back. Another week here for us at the line. We got a real mixed bag of topics this week. Luckily, there's been no sudden outpouring of new variants this week, which makes a nice change of pace from recently. I mean, is there anything left to say about Omicron? I mean, I think basically we're still where we were a week ago, which is that we're waiting. And
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I feel about it. I feel like I've sort of vented my entire mental health problems on the page on Omicron already. So until there's actually some data on that,
it's not fun. But I dug up an old column I wrote at the Post late January of 2020, where I had to explicitly say, I don't know what's going to happen. We're waiting. And in 30 days and 90 days, we'll know that this was either a Y2K-esque nothing burger or that we're all in deep shit. And I think turns out we were in deep shit. I'm still not particularly worried about Omicron. When Delta came out of India, they were throwing bodies in the Ganges, right? Like alongside the emergence of this new variant, we had very palpably obvious evidence that something terrible was happening. Omicron has obviously been loose in Africa for a while, and there is no evidence, at least at this time, that it is doing anything. I mean, it's not great, but I'm not seeing, like, they're not throwing bodies in the rivers like the Indians
well,
had to do.
the potential upside of Omicron is that, look, if it's a much more transmissible variant that's really no different from a common cold, that's a blessing in disguise, because it could mean that we have basically a common cold outpacing Delta,
Yeah.
right? Giving everyone herd immunity, or getting us to herd immunity that much faster with fraction to non-existent death tolls. That would be the obvious sort of evolution for the virus. My concern about Omicron, or something like Omicron happening, is that I honestly, I said this in the column, I think we're out of slack.
Yeah.
Right. That's my concern. Like probably Omicron's a false alarm, and probably it's going to be fine. The problem is that if it's not fine, I really am concerned that psychologically, materially, and emotionally, and socially, we don't have the room to handle another major crisis. We just don't have it.
I mean, you and I talked a bit about this earlier this week. The column I wrote, which will be published by the time people see this video, my column will already be live. If we got hit by anything else right now, I don't know what we'd do. And I mean, just because my sense of humor tends to veer towards the absurd. Like, imagine just as we're wrapping up this, like the wrong bird eats the wrong pig corpse or something, and then we get like some swine avian flu combo. And again, like, I'm saying this tongue a little bit in cheek here, but I think the point you made in your column on Thursday is bang on. I don't think financially, politically, or societally, or even just emotionally on an individual level, I don't think we'd be capable of handling another crisis right now, which doesn't mean we're not going to get one. It just means
well, not without severe and weird and unforeseen repercussions. And we're already seeing this weird, severe, and unforeseen repercussions from the first two variants. I really think that things would get very, very weird if we had a government saying, sorry, we've got to lock you down until we have another vaccine come in, and this time we can't afford to put you on CERB. So we're going to provide you with rations, I guess, but who would distribute them, because the military is engaged. I mean, things start to look and feel really dystopian in that scenario very quickly. So that's my concern about all of this, and how many people would obey. How many people would be like, nope, sorry, we're not doing this anymore.
I wouldn't go back and lock down again. I mean, I would pull back my social contacts, but I would work with my family to basically establish some sort of relatively tight bubble, and then we just fucking roll the dice. Like, it's, I mean, I've been fairly stoic throughout of this. But like, when I talk about us not having the capacity to respond to another emergency, I'm not excluding myself. Like, this is not something that I feel immune from. Actually, I want to. All right, that's about all I have to say about Omicron, though. You said something interesting, though, and it actually does lead to one of the other things on my notepad here. You had said this could be a false alarm. Mm-hmm. I actually think Omicron. This is me maybe putting a bit too much of an optimistic spin on this. I'm going to view this differently. Omicron isn't necessarily a false alarm. we can actually look at this as a fire drill. And I think we have, on the one hand, we have seen much faster coordinated global response to it. We have seen the federal government move faster to announce decisions than it normally has. We've seen, I think both of our provinces, Ontario and Alberta, have both announced they're changing booster plans to try and get immunity up in those who are willing to get boosted. I think this is good. Like, I think there's some urgency here, but I also
read that as an extension of the first thing. I think that people are not fucking around anymore because everybody recognizes that we can't, like we're so close to the edge and there's so little slack in the line that we can't afford to fuck around anymore. Things are getting serious.
I regret to inform you, we're still fucking around. The CBC on Thursday published this news story. I think I sent a link to you where I tweeted this, where I just took some screen caps of bits of the article. So the federal government has announced increased border precautions. They want everyone returning to be tested upon arrival at Canada, which, by the way, this is what some of like the grown-up countries have been doing from the very beginning, right? Okay, you can fly in, we will quarantine you and test you, and once we know you're not a carrier, we will release you. I think South Korea is an example. I remember fairly early in the pandemic reading this article. Maybe I can go dig it up.
And if you have like a rapid test kind of scenario, that's a very easy thing to do. I mean, this is also
apparently not.
Apparently, like this is part of my issue with Canada's sort of a weird aversion to rapid testing because it's only 90% accurate as opposed to 98. You know, like that's nuts. Like, you know, it's just that's completely nuts.
So what the CBC article says is the federal government has announced all these new protocols and has done nothing to enable them. And my snarky tweet on Thursday was one word: deliverology. And I just had a bunch of screen caps of the CBC report. Let me actually, so I don't normally do this, but let me actually literally read off the screen here while we're doing this video. All right, so this is from the CBC article published on Thursday. Asked Thursday if airports are ready to hand out tests or arrange for on-site testing, the president of the Canadian Airports Council, the organization that represents many of the country's airports, said he's still not sure how the program will work. Unfortunately, we have no new information on how or when the new testing requirements will be implemented. This is what the government has announced is already in place. This is just like the beginning. We talked about this in my column last week. We talked about it in the video as well. We announce stuff as if the announcement, like the virus cares. Let's say, hey, COVID, you're on notice. The Canadian government has announced a series of border policies. Let's see what else. Here is the this is a quote from the CBC article. Duclos, meaning Minister Duclos, the health minister, has said only that some passengers may have to wait up to 3 days in self-isolation before they get the results. Where those passengers will wait is unclear.
Of course, yeah, no, that's
the program was announced on Wednesday to take effect immediately. This is starting today, the minister told reporters. As of Thursday, there were no signs the program was up and running. And then this is my favorite line from it. It simply says, the hastily assembled plan to test all non-American international travelers to Canada for COVID has prompted confusion among passengers and airport operators alike because the federal government has released few details about how the new rules will be implemented. So we have announced a plan and then done nothing with it. And while I've been talking, a beautiful little baby has come and gotten into your lap.
Check out those pigtails, right? That'll cheer you up.
Aw.
You want milk? Well, you should go downstairs and ask your daddy.
Yeah.
Okay. Go downstairs and ask.
Does your beautiful redheaded pigtailed baby there realize that is supply managed milk?
It's low quality. It's rat milk. It's basically.
Oh, my mistake. Milk. Yeah.
Milk.
Anyway, look, like this is March of 2020 all over again. The federal government is announcing border control measures at the airports that do not exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Anyway, like I said, so I recently flew into the States and flew back and was in area that did not have like the rapid PCR testing for $150. So if you're doing this, you should actually go to Walgreens and get something called the ID Now test. It is technically a molecular test. It's an NAAT test, but you can get it for free. And it will give you the results within 24 hours, as opposed to the PCR test, which might give you results in as many as 72.
Do you self-administer, or do you have to go somewhere?
You have to go to the Walgreens. They give you the little stick, and you put it up your own nose and you put it back in. So you administer it in front of them.
Okay.
Are you just gonna sit there? Oh, we're having a conversation on the phone. Yeah. You're gonna have some calls, baby? So anyway,
your kids are always a real mirror back to you of what they think you're doing with your time. Yeah, when my daughter used to do daddy's work, she would just sit at my computer and bang on the keys. Yeah,
that's pretty much it. I mean, so what was interesting about that though is when I went to the States, totally seamless. You need a rapid antigen test, which you can grab at any Shoppers, takes 15 minutes. Get on a plane. Show your vaccine passport. You got to punch in all your, you show it at the gate, not an issue. Coming back, I then had to fly, I had to do a stopover flight. So it was I can't remember, it was North Carolina to Dallas or Atlanta or something like that. So I could get to Atlanta, no problem. But then I had to go to the Canadian gate in order to print out the boarding pass because stewardesses had to check my test.
Yeah.
But of course, you have American stewardesses working for Delta or something now doing checks on the Canadian tests or the Canadian test requirements. And of course, they don't know the 20-point detailed test requirements. All they say is a PCR or molecular test. And of course, if you look at the list, there's 20 tests that Canada will accept, but not the rapid antigen because nothing is integrated with the US system. So it's it's a lineup, 30 minutes long, total bloody chaos at the Canadian gate with these poor American stewardesses who are I think this is fine, check, and turning away other people because the Canadian requirements are so Byzantine and just a mess, just a disaster. And of course, we land on the other side. Some Canadians have figured out to download and go through the ArriveCan app, which you have to download separately. And it's just, because it's not integrated with the American system, and otherwise our entire travel network is totally integrated with the American system. We are essentially Fortress North America. So you can't effectively close the border or have different requirements for the US and the Canadian side and have it make any sense. We have American customs in Calgary and Toronto airports. We are an integrated network. So we have to all have basically the same requirements coming in, or it's just a messy disaster and it will never be properly enforced. And anyway, I think that the Canadian PCR requirement is completely overkill. There's no need to do this when we have rapid antigen testing that provides us faster. So there's been an interesting thread on Twitter about the time that we lose in the 72 hours to get your PCR test factors into the actual overall accuracy of the test. It's much, much better to have a test that is 90% accurate that you have in 15 minutes than to get a test that's 99% accurate that you get in 3 days.
Yeah, because God only knows who you've been making out with in the intervening 72 hours.
Precisely. So even if on paper the rapid antigen test is a little less accurate, it makes way more sense to do because you can just turn that shit around and get people through and then immediately flag people. And if it's a negative, then you can send them off to PCR or quarantine. It's a really smart tool. We just don't use it in Canada because we're dipshits.
It's funny as well because it's not, we're going to make a pivot here to federal politics in a minute. Anyway, for dispatch purposes, I'm going to write something up about how the fact that
we're doing everything all over again. The only thing I was promised by is the fact that nobody's seriously having the conversation about border closures are racist anymore. Nobody's I saw one column about this in the Globe and I was no, we're just ignoring that column. No, we're not seriously doing this anymore.
One of the things, it's interesting, I mean, you touched on this on your Thursday column. You actually touched on it. One of the things that I actually think we could write a whole column about that you only bounced off of is I actually accept that targeted country-specific travel bans don't make sense in a situation like this, because by the time you find it in one place, it's everywhere. Like
but we don't know that it's everywhere. That's the problem.
I mean, the moment we knew this thing was in Europe, I think the idea of banning South Africans was a waste of time.
But we don't know that. Like we could have 3 cases in Canada, and every single case that we keep out of Canada is another potential vector that we're stopping, right? Like, well, and we just don't know, right? And
yeah.
in the you want to talk abundance of caution, go look at the Nature study. I said it in my column. Border closures and effective border closures are one of the most effective NPIs, bar none. Now, in a place like Canada, where we can't effectively totally control our border, how effective are they? Probably less effective. Yeah. But like I said, if you're measuring, if Omicron is like the big bad, it's got a 20% fatality rate, and it's going to take us 100 days to get vaccine to arms. Put it this way: if border closures manage to slow the virus by like, well, or even if it buys us 5 to 10 days, in the greater scheme of things, does it matter? No. But if it gets us 5 to 10 days closer to a vaccine, that's bodies and bags.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point I was going to make. There's this weird dismissal of time buying measures. And it's like, well, do you want more time or less?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sorry, I don't have a perfect solution to this, but I've got something before me that's going to buy us a couple of weeks. You want them?
And even if it's a couple of days, it's not like we're in a situation like we were back in March 2020, where, vaccines might be 10 years off. We don't know. If we know we can get vaccines in 100 days, then if all we buy is 5, great. I'll take the 5.
I'll take the 5. Let's make the pivot to federal stuff. Sure. So I will do the border, what has happened before is happening again thing. You'd mentioned conversion therapy. This has been on my radar all week as something where I should go read the reports about it, but it happened so fast because basically what happened is that all the parties joined with so-called unanimous consent to immediately move a bill through the House to ban conversion therapy for adults. I have a question for you. This is something, without identifying anyone, months ago, you and I had been sent a piece. It was a very interesting piece. It was about federal legislation about conversion therapy. And we had to give it a really vigorous fact check and editing. And ultimately, we decided not to publish the piece. We had concerns about some of the factual content. Part of that was I asked directly the Ministry of Justice, would adults be prohibited from choosing on their own to undergo therapy? And and it just as an example, if you are a deeply religious person and you're having same-sex attraction, are we going to make it illegal to go to your therapist and say, help me control my
or go to your priest, essentially,
or go to your priest? Yeah. And the federal government had told me, nope, we are not in any way taking any action to criminalize the personal health and therapy decisions of adults. Is that still the case, or have we actually decided to go ahead and ban
that's according to my read of the law. Now, the new law C4 has been wildly cleaned up from C6. It's a much clearer law. There's a couple of interesting things about it. Firstly, I mean, the obvious one is good for the CPC for avoiding an obvious trap, because
they actually proposed unanimous consent.
Yeah. Great. This is not going to be an issue. It's an obvious trap to have opposed it. And they didn't. And also, I think that it says promising things for Aaron O'Toole's sort of consolidation of his leadership in the party, that this thing went with unanimous consent. So that is one section. Secondly, I read through C4. It's massively cleaned up from C6. There's a couple of points of concern that this law deals with rather deftly. One is, no, it does not bar consenting adults from choosing to engage in conversion therapy if they want to. What it bars is forcing children to go through conversion therapy. It bars advertising conversion therapy. It bars coercing people into conversion therapy, and it bars advertising conversion therapy. So I think that's it's a pretty reasonable law. I mean, the problem with banning conversion therapy for adults is that, bluntly, we allow consenting adults to do all kinds of shit that's harmful for them psychologically and physically. And if you were to bar conversion therapy on the grounds that it's harmful, there's a whole gamut of things that opens up. I mean, guess what? So's naturopathy, so's homeopathy. He was my, and not only do we not bar those things, we bloody license half of it. So like bluntly, we have to maintain certain freedoms to allow adults to make bad decisions for
Of course.
themselves.
Yeah.
And
You have a right to be an idiot.
You have a right to be an idiot, and you have a right to harm yourself to a reasonable extent. I mean, for Christ's sakes, suicide's legal. Euthanasia is legal in this country. So like, it would be really bizarre to set the line here. But I would sort of be on board with conversion therapy that bars it. I think this is bad stuff, and you shouldn't do this to yourself, and you certainly shouldn't be doing this to kids. I mean, we have enough horror stories about kids going through conversion therapy to say that there's a compelling argument for banning it for kids. And you also can't take your kids out of the country to engage in conversion therapy. I have no problems with any of that. The second major concern with this law has to do with the conflation of conversion therapy that was traditionally sort of faith-based and aimed at gay kids, and conflating that with gender therapies that were intended for people who were suffering from gender dysphoria.
Okay.
And basically treating legitimate sexology or treating legitimate forms of therapy for kids who are struggling with gender dysphoria as conversion therapy, and just conflating those two things. We're talking about wildly different things. Conversion therapy is like church basement, pray away the gay stuff. That is what we are condemning. That's a whole different ballgame than like, an accredited researcher at a Center for Gender Health taking a kid with gender dysphoria and being like, let's explore how you feel, and let's sort of see where the origins of your gender dysphoria might be. Maybe they're rooted in you being trans, but maybe they're rooted in other psychological issues. Let's explore that. That has been sort of wrongly treated as conversion therapy, because conversion therapy is a very loaded term, and it's not. So it's not conversion therapy. It's very different. So the law also explicitly lays out in text, like therapy that is intended to sort of help someone deal with gender dysphoria, but doesn't treat one outcome as better than the other, is not considered conversion therapy for the purposes of this law.
See, that's interesting, because a few months ago when I had emailed the Attorney General's office and I had asked, that was one of the other items on the list, and they had said to me, therapy that is pushing someone with gender dysphoria to one outcome or the other would be banned. Therapy to assist someone on their personal journey of settling upon a gender identity would not be banned. And I'm glad to know that they've cleaned that up for the new bill, because in the old bill, it wasn't as alarming as what the Chicken Littles were saying, but it wasn't well written.
It wasn't well written. And then the other thing I would say is that, there probably will be some pushback for C4 from sexologists and therapists who work with kids, in particular kids with gender dysphoria, by saying, like, this bill maybe doesn't protect us enough, or this bill will have a chilling effect on the kind of practice that we do. There have been, I don't know if we really want to get into it, but there's this whole big controversy about affirmative care versus sort of the, I think the other word for it is a sort of a non-confrontational approach where you just allow the kid
watching and waiting.
Watching and waiting. That's right. Confirmative care versus watching and waiting. So there is controversy within sort of how to treat trans kid, which approach is better under what circumstances. And for people who advocate for the watching and waiting approach, they might say this bill is going to have a chilling effect for them in their practice. But I think that the way that it's written is pretty clear that watching and waiting has not been criminalized here.
Yeah.
So I think that now it's just a question of whether or not that's actually going to be tested in court.
Okay, well, look, you're obviously way ahead of this compared to me, so I will entrust this one to you. Yes. How do you feel about a shooting war with Russia?
Well, I mean, isn't in a video game space, or
no, like a real shooting war with Russia?
Not great.
So you'd say you're not in favor of this?
I think that maybe now is not the best moment for that for us.
As I tweeted just a couple of days ago, I think it would be better to not have a war in Europe. I don't want to go on a limb, but I think that's where my initial impulse goes as well. I deeply resent the fact that we're all having to spend so much time trying to gauge Putin's inner motivations, but I think that's exactly what he wants us to be doing. So obviously we're talking about the fact that NATO, of which Canada is a founding member, has been warning in increasingly strident terms that Russia, you don't want to invade Ukraine. I'd have to check this. Canada has been participating in training missions with troops in Ukraine, assisting local military forces develop their combat capabilities. I don't know if that mission has wrapped. I don't think it has. I think Canada has been a fairly significant contributor to the Ukrainian self-defense programs. I don't know. Like my gut feeling is that Russia wants attention. I know it sounds terrible, but Biden only cares about China. Our feelings are hurt. Let's go put 100,000 men on the Ukrainian frontier and get the White House's attention. But the problem is,
I don't think that's what's happening. I think basically Ukraine is disintegrating from within and is looking very likely to engage in some kind of civil war. And I suspect that Russia is being opportunistic.
Well, I don't think they're disintegrating from within without a whole lot of help. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Ukraine's pretty messed up.
Yeah, but I mean, I think to the extent that there are problems within Ukraine, it's because guys like Putin are pouring in money and logistical support and weapons to make that happen. I mean, a destabilized, collapsing Ukraine is a godsend for Russia. I can tell myself a very soothing narrative that this is all about Russian domestic politics. This is about banging the drum, looking tough, trying to get that coveted phone call with Biden. I'm not convinced that's the case. And something I've been writing about recently is how after 20 months, my ability to objectively analyze risk is just shot. Like whatever part of my brain that does that is tired. And I'm looking at, again, like Canada, a contributor to NATO, we have a battle group that we command in the Baltic states right on the Russian frontier. It's a multinational NATO force that we're the commanding nation of. The purpose there is to stand in Russia's way. It's a tripwire force. If you want to come for these Baltic states, you got to kill a bunch of Canucks and Brits and Americans first. And we hope they don't want to do that. After 20 months, I don't take for granted anymore that they won't just drive over a whole bunch of Canucks and machine gun them to death here.
Also considering we're such in a state of disarray and vulnerability here in the West, right? Like this.
Oh, it's a good time.
This would be the moment. If I were one of these states, if I were a hostile state, I'd be like, okay, so pretty much the entire Western world is exhausted. It's going through round X of COVID waves. It's materially spent. Its cycle, its social cohesion is fraying at the seams, and people are, crazy and exhausted. Cool.
Could have done without the button pushing illusion, but I hear you. Yeah, no, I know. And this is what worries me. And as you had said in your column, we're living in a dark timeline here. I mean, the idea of a shooting war in Europe seems absurd to me, but a lot of things that seem absurd to me have now just become part of life.
Well, this is also what we're going into when we talk about compounding crises.
Yeah.
Right. It's one major crack has shown in the fissure, and this reveals more and more cracks. And a West that appears weak is more vulnerable to being victimized by bad actors than a West that doesn't appear weak. Do we appear strong right now?
No. And that can easily backfire, right? Because
we might be stronger than any of these people actually give us credit for, or this
might be exactly what we need.
Yeah, to get our asses back in gear.
Or even just, maybe the morale building project we all need in 2022 is thrashing a few Russian armored divisions. The problem is if you're Putin and you make that bet, okay, what do you do? This is the reason these things are very, very dangerous is because it's a lot easier to escalate these kinds of crises than de-escalate them. I don't know. My gut feeling in the overall strategic environment is that Russia is very sensitive to the fact that its influence is waning. It knows that it is basically falling out of it has fallen out of the superpower club, that the West is increasingly focused on China, and Russia's like, oh yeah, well, we can cause problems too. I just don't know where this ends well. I will say that Melanie Joly, our new foreign affairs minister, was recently having a meeting with NATO leadership. And I don't know, that wasn't as reassuring as you might have hoped. That's not
just giving you a face. Can we put Anita Anand on it?
Well, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, but I was actually talking to a policy wonk just this morning where one of the things that isn't great is that Russian tanks are mounting external clad armor, which is not the sort of thing you do before an exercise. It's the sort of thing you do before you roll into territory where you expect people to be firing missiles at you. And again, this could all just be part of Putin's psychology campaign, right? Like this is old Cold War stuff. We used to do stuff like this too, where we just fly a bunch of bombers at them and turn them around the last minute. We wanted them not knowing what the fuck we were doing, right? So Putin's read those books. Like he knows how to do this sort of thing. But I got just an immediate note from a policy wonk, is basically saying, he says, we have better leadership at defense than we do at foreign affairs, and that'll probably be helpful to us in a war, but I don't know if it'll help us stay out of one.
An aside note here is that I did a talk at an ag conference yesterday, and Scott Moe was the keynote speaker, and he gave us hell. Apparently I was too political for him. But anyway, at the end of it, he was talking about how he is opening up. Well, he was very pissed about what Trudeau said in COP26, but he announced that Saskatchewan is going to start basically treating itself a little bit more like it's a nation state within a nation state, and opening up more foreign offices. This is something that Alberta's traditionally done as well. Doesn't it say something about the state of global affairs Canada? The provinces are basically taking over diplomacy for themselves.
That's interesting. It does. I don't know what it says though, because I can offer. I mean,
they're not taking over political diplomacy. They're taking over building out and reaching bridges and business.
Yeah.
But that's traditionally what part of what the embassies did. And basically the provinces no longer trust them to do that. So they were going to. I mean, Mo was talking about how he's going to be talking at the next a climate change conference, I think in Spain or Mexico. And he's going to be bringing all the good things that Canada is doing to reduce emissions and be doing the good news story out of Canada, because he didn't hear Trudeau do that at COP26.
Oh, good. So, well, the Premier of Saskatchewan will go to straighten out the global leadership.
But I mean, it's kind of interesting that in the absence of leadership at the federal level, the provinces are like, oh shit, we can't, you know what I mean? Like is that an
absence of leadership at the federal level, or is it the provincial leaders not liking the leadership at the federal level?
Maybe it's both. You could argue both. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, but basically if your leadership is all about trashing your own country and talking about what a terrible emitter you are, and I'm going to put my own sort of desire to look good among the Davos set above the interests of the people I'm actually governing, I can't really blame Mo and Alberta.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, I'm not saying I would side with the feds on this one. Even if you are broadly supportive of carbon reduction, as I am, the way the Trudeau Liberals handled this was just a typical Trudeau Liberal. We're going to announce something and then worry about the details later. Like it's all part of a pattern here. But
I just think that it's interesting. The provinces are basically setting up quasi embassies around the world. I think that's what they're doing. They're calling them business offices, but they're quasi embassies.
Oh, of course, yeah. No, I mean, well, or they're trade offices. They're trade delegations.
They're trade offices or trade delegations, because they can't trust global affairs to handle their shit.
Something that I don't know we have a good handle on. I don't mean just you and I mean Canadians in general. I don't even know who we could ask about this, is how lean the Canadian Foreign Service is. You'll remember this. I was thinking about this in the context of a different column I might end up writing. One of the things the Trudeau Liberals I actually think did well, not perfectly, but I would give them a decent grade on this, is I think they kind of rode the bucking bronco of the Trump presidency fairly well. Like I think they managed that weirdness. Chaos. But the problem is, as some of the Ottawa wonks would tell you, is doing so required 100% of the bandwidth of basically the Trudeau cabinet and the Canadian Foreign Service, right? So like every other issue ground to a halt. And I get it, like our relationship with the Americans is plus sized in its importance, but that still wasn't encouraging. All right, you know what? Yeah, we've got some stuff here. We should, I don't know if we'll put this in the dispatch, but we should probably go poke someone to get a piece about Canadian Foreign Service stuff. That would be interesting, I think.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So Okay, and then the last thing we wanted to maybe talk about was
It's kind of
BuzzFeed walking out, and what is it? There's a big walkout at BuzzFeed. You've heard of some
yeah.
layoffs happening, and belatedly, I kind of wanted to chat about some layoffs that happened at one of the lefty kind of independent media orgs here, and I think your take on all of this is just like media is still struggling to find the model that works.
I don't think, I mean, you obviously, before we roll tape on these things, we kick around our ideas first. And we had a bunch of ideas that we kind of decided not to go in on. But I do think if you kind of blend a couple of them together, we start to see a narrative. And basically, here's the 3-point form takeaways. I can't name names yet, but I've recently become aware that some people that I know and like, who would be within their city, they're not national figures or anything, but they're prominent names within their local market. They're gone. They've been bought out by their company, and they're no longer in the game. And I don't have all the details yet because nothing's been formally announced. They're doing the negotiations now, but it's just yet more cutting of bodies and money and salary and resources and capability and capacity within legacy media. You mentioned to me after I told that to you that BuzzFeed is currently locked out because the staff there
they walked out. The staff walked out for a day. Yeah.
Okay, they walked out for a day over contractual issues.
Yeah, I think they've been waiting for 2 years or something like that for contracts.
And that what just kind of jumped out at me is how we have these online giants were supposed to be the MSM successors, and I don't mean the little rinky-dink ones that started up. I mean some of these big ones. BuzzFeed being an example, Vox being an example, Huffington Post being an example. This was the next thing. And they have, not only have they raced conventional media to the bottom, they've just met them there. I mean, in terms of staffing, layoffs, churns, pivots to video, these news stories, like you could go through a story about these online media companies and their trial and travails and just like do a find and replace in the text and just put in like Globe and Mail, National Post, and the articles would read the same.
Well, and then the other thing I would observe is that what we've seen on the independent media side is examples where you've got independent media, particularly left-leaning independent media, becoming really dependent on grant money and corporate social responsibility money. Facebook wants to look less evil, so they apportion $100 million to fund various Facebook or journalism initiatives, and this money goes to the type of journalism that people think the world ought to have more of. So what happens is that
really Canadian earnest stuff.
Yeah, it goes to really Canadian earnest stuff that clearly means really well, but can't actually deliver an audience and so they wind up being dependent upon corporate social responsibility money and grant money, stuff that sounds really good, but because that's their audience, that's who they write to. They write the kinds of stuff that looks good on grants, and they don't develop any audience, no actual presence. I mean, this is what happened to one of the local lefty organizations that recently massively downsized. They did do some really good journalism, but not consistently or well enough to generate enough money to support the size of their staff on subscription rates alone. So when the grant money ran out, the whole thing fell apart. And they had
grant money, they had a staff, they had a multi-year run. And their subscriber base was a fraction of what ours is. And we want to grow ours more. They're like the bigger it gets, the more we can do. Yeah. But it was astonishing to me how few actual readers they had convinced to pay for our product.
Yes. And I mean, what was interesting about that, I mean, I'm not tooting our own horn. I think that our model is good because our income is very tightly tied to actual readers who believe in us enough to support us. Love you. But the risk, of course, to that model is audience capture. I mean, we could point to some other mainstream or sort of media organizations, both in the left and the right sphere, that have really fallen down the audience capture hole. When you are reliant on an audience to supply your bread, the temptation is to give your audience what it wants and what it's hungering for, and that can start to spiral into greater extremism and bubble thinking, and it's a real risk. It's something we're conscious of here at the line, and like
we've seen that happen once or twice.
We've seen that happen once, and one of the things that we went into the line with was an understanding that was a real risk for us, and we're going to have to try and I should say this, work off of each other's worst instincts to try and prevent that from happening.
Well, also, we just have to aim our guns in every direction.
Aim our
Like
guns in every direction.
we
Make sure
need
everybody hates us.
we need to reliably remind the audience on a regular basis that if you bring your sacred cow to us, we're barbecuing it.
Yes, this is the way to make friends and money in this industry, is just to make sure everyone hates you. It's great.
I mean,
Anyway, but
if you
anyway,
fire your guns in all direction, no one will ever claim to own you.
yes, that's true. So anyway, there might be a little bit to note about this, and just basically sum it up by saying, like, everyone's still fucked in media.
If there is a successor model yet, we haven't found it. And you mentioned audience capture being our greatest risk. I mean, here, I'm not going to air our business plan on a video here. Our greatest risk is audience capture, 50%. Other 50% is platform capture. Because Substack tomorrow decides it's pivoting to a new business model, and
or a new owner takes over and decides that it doesn't actually not as interested in supporting controversial opinion or content anymore, and
all it wants to do is focus on eco issues. Or
that being said, I do think there are now enough competitors to Substack that we would just go to another platform if we had to. I mean, not that we really want to. Substack's actually been really good to us, and has been, I think their support's been great. So I have no real complaints about Substack, and I don't think they have any real cause to be complaining about us either. So,
but if anything keeps me up at night on this, it's the fact that it's audience capture and platform capture. So we continue to find new ways to try and go forward. We don't have all the answers yet, but I think we've got ourselves a dispatch plan. So I'll do a little medley on Omicron to the extent that anything is known. I'll do border dysfunction. I'll do Ukraine. Do you want to do conversion therapy?
I'll do conversion therapy and
media medley.
Also, to the audience, check out my super sexy bathrobe. I wore that all day because I was cold.
You're drawing all the attention away from my faded NASA t-shirt. As ever, we will ask some of our other friends and colleagues to contribute. We will see what they have to say if any of them want to jump in. Otherwise, that's it for us. We will talk to you soon. Take care.